Hey everyone, good evening. Welcome to the Rare Book Room. My name is Nicholas and I help direct the events here at the Strand bookstore. For a little bit of history, the Strand was founded in 1927 over on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled until after over 92 years, Strand is the sole survivor, still run by the Bass family, housing new and used books and running 400 events a year. Tonight I am thrilled to be welcoming Nathan W. Pyle to the Rare Book Room to celebrate the release of his brand new collection, Strange Planet. Picking up from his wildly popular series documenting life in pink, blue, green, and purple universe that's just close enough to ours, it features old favorites alongside new excursions into the brilliant and off-kilter mind of the inhabitants. One of my favorite ones is the sun damage one. It's perfect. I don't know. Nathan has previously published the New York Times bestsellers, NYC Basic Tips and Etiquette, of which I am a big fan, and 99 Stories I Could Tell. I couldn't be more excited to have him here with us tonight. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Nathan to the Strand.
This is the clicker? That's an extra one. Oh, it's an extra. Okay, yeah. All right. Check one. Hello. I'm Nathan Pyle, and I'm here to talk about Strange Planet. So I have put together a slideshow for you where I'm going to speak and also show you some things. I know if you can't see the screen very well, I'm going to describe what's on the screen, and I'm going to put the being here on the chair. What I decided to do when I'm talking about Strange Planet is describe how you could create your own cohesive universe. Because one of the best things that I think I could pass on to anyone is that this has been a labor of love, especially between my wife and me. That's Taylor. You gonna wave to the crowd? There she is. Yes. Taylor is my constant editor and my first person that I tell any idea to. So we just got married in December, and Strange Planet came about in February. So this was, as we say, our child here, and it really is. It really is work every day. With Taylor, she tells me immediately if something's a bad idea. And she also is able to tell me when I can lose a few words here or there. She's a CPA, so she has a more analytical detail mind. Mine's more vision, less detail. So that's how we work together. But how you can create your own cohesive universe with Strange Planet. What I want to talk about first is that Strange Planet is now fully robust. So you might come in thinking there's hundreds of these comics, and I have this book in my hand now. This is a very robust and filled out thing, but it really doesn't start that way. And any idea that you're coming around to is just going to start with one germ, one seed. So one of the first rules I try to tell people about creativity that I follow is first ball in. When my dad and I were shooting the basketball as a kid, he might say, let's see how many free throws out of 10 you can hit. But we're going to do first ball in. And if you've ever done any kind of sports, you know that means essentially you don't start counting until you make one. And that's it. That's where the best thing you can do with creativity. And you want to do a comic series, do a first ball in. Don't think of a robust universe with a lot of ideas and then dump it on everyone. Instead, think of a good comic, one of your comics that's good, and actually move from there. And start from that good comic and move on to the universe starting from that one good comic. So a really good example of first ball in is Dofflock Bones. This was a January character that I came up with, and it was a dolphin detective. Essentially, I know what you're thinking. Why haven't I heard of this? It should be famous. It really isn't. The Dofflock Bones is not very famous, but I came up with it in January, and I had one good comic, and people who follow me on Instagram said, oh, you should do more Dofflock. Dofflock is funny. Dofflock has a squid assistant named Flotsam. There's opportunity here for people to laugh about the dolphin. Essentially, Dofflock Bones is doing solving fisheries mysteries, and so this fish is talking about how there's a stalker, and every time it goes to the window, the stalker appears, and then the Dofflock says most fish don't understand mirrors. And so like this was all about how dolphins are smarter than everyone else in the sea. And so everyone said like, oh, you should do more of this. You should do more of Dofflock Bones. And I said, okay, I absolutely will. And so I did 2, and that was it. That's all I could think of. And so that's the idea when you do first ball in. It's not always going to work, but the very best concept you can come up with is like, all right, at least start with something that is an idea that you can build on. So I did 2 Dofflock Bones episodes, and since then Dofflock has remained dormant for the last 10 months. But if you go to Dofflock Bones, you can actually, you go there on Instagram, you can actually enter in digital questions tonight. Because we will do some Q&A with a microphone. But if you go to Dofflock Bones, I posted in the story there a Q&A that you could enter in questions on there. So the reason I do that is that Taylor is the one fan I know who follows Dofflock Bones. Such a faithful fan of Nathan's work. So one reason I do that is that if I put the Q&A on Strange Planet, then it won't be questions from this room. So I just wanted to be questions from this room because literally no one's looking at Dofflock Bones except for you right now, which is great. And that's okay. And that's part of what I say first ball in. You start with a good comic. Dofflock Bones was good, but it didn't have legs, no pun intended. It didn't have enough. There wasn't enough material there. I kept thinking about, all right, what are some mysteries that would happen in the ocean? Yeah, maybe I'll come back to it someday, but I just haven't thought of many. So that's a good thought. Like, you know, Dofflock Bones is going to come away. I'm going to come away with some lessons there. So one of the lessons that I learned from Dofflock Bones, if you can see the screen, is that Dofflock Bones has this nice round head, and I love to curve the words around the head. And I thought, all right, this is something I really like visually. I think it works well. And I'm going to do a lot more of that in the future. So it's something I do all the time in Strange Planet now. I put the word around the head of the being because it attaches the words to the character in a really, really cohesive way. But it also, it gives it a distinct look. It gives it an unusual look. And that's something you're always trying to do. When you make comics, you know, comics are pretty simple. So you want to do as much as you can to give it a distinct look. So first ball in is the concept there. You're going to come away with some lessons, and you might come away with something that works. This was the very first Strange Planet comic, and this is what happened here. I'm going to scoot out myself. Don't worry about me. All right. There we go. So a friend's arriving soon. Let us store irregular shapes inside shapes with flat surfaces. The idea was that Taylor and I, February, this was after Dofflock died, February, Taylor and I had a birthday party in a home. And then we started to clean up, and then we stored our toaster in the closet because we have what I'm sure you're familiar with is a galley kitchen. It's a kitchen where you take turns going in, and it's so small that we had to move different appliances into different parts of the house so that when friends came over, they really were like, hey, look how clean it looks in here. And that's the idea. I thought, all right, this could be a good comic. I like this. Going back to the concept I just said, it's first ball in. So first ball in, this was it. I said, all right, I like these beings. I like the way I've drawn them. They're friendly, but they seem like they might be on another planet, which is fun. So I did that. I created this comic, and it did well. If you look at the one detail that I changed from it, and you can only see it if you're looking closely, is that I gave them 3 fingers now. So they only have 3 digits, whereas they had 4 in the very first comic. But if you look historically on my Instagram, they do have 4 in that very first comic. So it's just something for you to check out. Make introductions clearly is a second rule. If you want to build a cohesive universe, first ball in, and then make introductions clearly. So one of the best ways to do that is to say, like, all right, introducing a cat or a feline type character, you say, I found this, great. You're really not saying much in that panel, right? But the idea is that you're making a real introduction that's clear. And their reaction to the creature is part of what is so intriguing. That when they say they saw the yelling creature, they say, "Come observe this paradoxical creature." Again, that's a panel where you're just not learning much, except that they're observing something new. So you're making introductions clearly, and this is just a signpost for everyone to realize, like, all right, something new is happening. This is a spin blaster, superb life givers. This is superior to doing so physically. Extreme Strike Siblings is one of my favorite video games in Strange Planet. And Extreme Strike Siblings was the first time I used the word sibling, which again is just part of the introduction. So that when I use the word sibling later, everyone is not surprised. They kind of connect it to like Super Smash Brothers, right? So it's a really easy way to make these introductions. And you make all these introductions, and then you're able to kind of build on top of your last comic. One of the best things about daily comics is that some of your comics are going to be funnier than others. But the ones that aren't as funny, you can make them so that they build on your world. So you introduce a new word. You introduce a new concept. Whatever it is, it's going to feed into the future, because then when you use the term flavor muscle later, people are like, oh, yeah, that means tongue. I saw it in the Doctor comic. The Doctor comic wasn't that funny, but flavor muscle, I remember. So, and that's okay. Again, daily comics is about building over time. Breaking rules consistently is another item that I think is really important. Will it respond to its name? Never is one of my favorite comics about the vibrating creature. You can see the rule that I'm breaking here already that I've set up is that the vibrating creature has 2 eyes and the yelling creature has 3. And it's just something I decided to do. So when people ask me in the comments, why did you do that? I just say it's nature. Nature is like that. And that's what you're allowed to do if you're creating the world. It makes people mad sometimes. And I've already read on some of the book reviews, people will say things like, some of these things are not very consistent. And I know, like, you have an opportunity as a creator to go back and kind of retroactively fix things like they did with the Star Wars Death Star thing. Where it's like, oh, yeah, well, here's why the exhaust port was the way it was. That's what you're able to do as a creator. It's fine. You just have to keep track of it so that you're breaking rules consistently. And you have a reason for it. So that's what's fun. Breaking rules consistently with the eyes, that's another simple rule for cohesive building of worlds. And here's another one, play to your strengths. So I knew, for instance, my own strengths from previous comics. I had about 200,000 followers when I started Strange Planet. I was doing my own comics, and they were successful, but I'd never done anything cohesive and continuous. So because I'd done a bunch of comics that I knew did well, I looked at those and thought, all right, here's what I know I can do well. So this is one of my favorite ones that I had done before. It said, sorry. It's just, sometimes I don't remember what I wrote. Have you been helped, sir, by so many people my entire life? And then just smiling and then smiling. And it's just an absurd comic. But the idea is that, like, I know what I'm doing well here, and this is a smile that I stole directly from my wife. She smiles that way when we go to Chopped. She just loves Chopped so much. That I knew I could draw these expressions well. I think this is something I do well. This kind of like it's definitely happy, but it's not like it's so happy. It's like this kind of content. It's warm, and I think I do warm well. I'm doing warm expressions well. All right, that's one of my strengths, so I'm going to play with that. I also can do sad well. So I know this one, but what should we call the outside of the tree? And the dog says, "This is my moment," and then the dog says, "Woof," and the dog says, "I blew it." Like I knew sad is something I could do well because I was doing sad comics, and the dog, see, again, it's not, again, like a very, very sad face. It's more of a existentially sad thing. Like the dog had lived for this moment and then blew it. It's really sad. But I feel like I could do warm, I could do sad, I could do extremely sad. This was just a really sad. This is just someone very excited to see the dinosaurs, and someone said on Twitter when I posted this, this is the darkest thing you've ever drawn, and I said, well, it's going to get brighter later. So it's really terrible, but I knew that I could do sad well, so I'm doing sad, and I thought I'm going to move forward with these things. I can do warm expressions, and I can do sad. And I'm going to play to my strength. So I'm not good at drawing hair, and I don't draw hands very well. So I'm going to give them 3 digits each. But that's what you do. You play to your strengths, and that's how Strange Planet comes about. You play to your strengths. You do what you know how to do. And really, again, it's just coming from that very, very simple idea that you form a wide base. So Dothlock Bones didn't succeed because it didn't have a wide base. Think of it like a pyramid or any tower that you build, as wide of a base as you can make, right? So the very first Strange Planet comic was about tidying up, which is a really mundane idea. If you can do a lot of comics about mundane ideas and not about mysteries in the ocean, then you absolutely are going to be able to form a wider base. And that's what makes Strange Planet better. So I'm going to go through some of the questions that I've been asked over the months so far. Do you drink apple juice while drawing the comics? They read that way. It's in the subtext. Somebody sent in that question. I've been thinking a lot about it. I actually think that is exactly right. I think there's a certain amount of yes, I do drink apple juice occasionally, especially on the airplane. When they offer it 5 times. I just want to go through a couple things that I think are really important because it's important to mention if you are trying to build your own comic world. Comic influences, I have many, and on Twitter you can see how many different people that I might follow who are comic artists. But for me as a kid, I grew up reading Gary Larson the most. So Gary Larson was absolutely my favorite, is my favorite, still Far Side. The idea that Gary Larson might come back into the game somehow is wildly just interesting to everyone because the internet age I think is just prime for Gary Larson to be there again, and I think it's really fascinating. But if you've never looked at Gary Larson, one of the best things you can do is to get the 10th anniversary edition of the Far Side collection. That's what I have in my home. It's probably 20th anniversary now. But the idea is that he talks about his comics in the comic book, and it's really nice, and it's a really exciting thing to learn. Scott McCloud has a comic Bible that everyone uses, and it's Understanding Comics. It's here at the Strand. I saw it on the way up. It's near the stairwell. But Scott McCloud, if you want to read or draw comics, Scott McCloud is the person to read. So there's just a lot of amazing people that I follow on the internet now that I think so many of us learn so many of the basics from the same kind of people. But I grew up reading Gary Larson the most. I would say Sarah Anderson on Twitter or Instagram, however you follow Sarah Anderson, is one of my favorites. And again, I could go all day just listing all the ones I love. Poorly Drawn Lines is extremely funny. There's so many extremely funny people that I follow. So what software and hardware do you use? I always like to get this one out of the way because I want to make sure you know. I just use an iPad and I use Procreate. So Procreate's a very inexpensive program. There are other programs that are very similar to it, but Procreate's very good, and I would recommend it to anyone. I keep all my drawings organized like that. It looks like that in Procreate, which is really nice. So it's good for visually organized people like that. And this is my favorite comic. This is the last question I like to make sure people see. This comic is about mutual limb enclosure. And I think one of my favorite ideas here is that we are absorbing facial fluids from each other. So sadness is a theme of Strange Planet that I go back to over and over. And really the reason for me is that I think humans have come up with all these complex ways to show that we care about each other. But some of the most meaningful ways are extremely simple. It's holding each other close, right? And it's allowing someone else to be messy on us to absorb the fluids that come off of their face. That's a real sign of affection, that you're not grossed out by it, that you actually are embracing someone. So whenever I share this one or share a similar one that's about consolation, I always share this article from the LA Times, which is about ring theory. It's about how to console people who are grieving. And it's one of my favorite articles because it's essentially talking about how when we console others who are grieving, we think about the epicenter of grief. And you never dump in towards the epicenter. You always dump out. So you don't complain to someone who has it worse than you. If someone is grieving, then you allow them to dump on you. And then you go dump on someone who is farther away from the tragedy. So it's a really brilliant article, and I share it every time. It's 500 words, but it's one of the most meaningful articles I've ever read about it. But the reason I share that is because I think sadness and consolation are one of the most human ideas, that we have a massive amount of language and complex ways to help each other, but hugging is still one of the best. Hugging in silence, right? So with that said, I want to make sure that we do some Q&A before we get to the signing. So Taylor, would you mind coming up and sitting with the being here? Thank you so much. Everyone give Taylor a hand. All right, so Taylor will do one question. This is how we're going to do it. We'll do one question from the Instagram, and then we'll do one from the crowd, and then we'll alternate. I've just found that's the best way to do it. Yeah, Taylor, first question.
Well, I will say that there were a few questions on Dog Bones before you told the audience, which means that those 3,000 followers are actually maybe
someone is looking at Dog Bones.
They're kind of looking at Dog Bones.
That's shocking.
And a lot of people want to know if it's going to continue.
It's not. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Okay.
That's great.
Perfect. There we go.
What?
Check 1, check 2. There we go. Thank you.
Okay. What is next for Strange Planet, and where do you hope to see it grow?
Well, what is next for Strange Planet is that we're going to give more opportunity for people to certainly interact with the being. I field so many questions about when I can offer this to people. Yep. This is a prototype, and one of the things that I noticed was when I actually did post the prototype, people immediately were telling me all the ways that it was bad. I got 6,000 suggestions on how to make it better. But this is a puppet, which is why the mouth is so big. And I'm going to change the eyes to be less creepy. But we are going to offer more chances to be connected to the being. One of the fun things about Strange Planet is that we're seeing a lot of people just want to they want to interact. So at Comic-Con, our first time at Comic-Con, one of the funniest things was that someone would want to take a photo with a being and not even with me. So, which is great. I think that's wonderful, honestly. I don't even have to go to Comic-Con. And I just say the being will be there because that's what's more important to people. So I think that's what's fun is that we want to create a character who is actually more desirable even than talking to me. So that's what's next. And then obviously anything's possible for the future of animation and more books and all those things. Definitely there's a lot of things that are possible. I just want to say it did start in February and we did just get married. So we're trying to have a normal bandwidth of life here. So yeah, we're really having fun. Next question from the crowd. I'm ready. Question from the crowd.
Would you ever consider making a television series?
Would I consider making a television series? Absolutely. Yeah. No, there are many people who email me about it, and they're I can tell from their email are very important people. So I oh wow, yeah, that is interesting. It's all very exciting. I am absolutely in the interest market. The main thing that I consider is that we want to move slowly and not jump into the first idea that comes to our heads, because Strange Planet is unusual, and even now, I think, what is it like when someone actually reads a script? You know who actually tells me sometimes is some random person on TikTok who uses it as a script for their TikTok. So someone will occasionally message me and say, hey, someone used your Strange Planet comic as a script for TikTok. That's great, because then I get a chance to see oh, how are people reading this? It's really nice. It's interesting. So it's nice. People do comic dubs all the time on YouTube, so you get a chance to see how people read it. But the main thing is that we're moving cautiously, because what is there is special, and you don't want to rush into it. Yeah. But I appreciate the question. Next question from the digital audience.
Yes. Okay. What are some of the story ideas that didn't pan out into a whole comic for Strange Planet?
Sure. Well, I think a good example of this is when I used the punchline the other day. The beings were driving in the roll machine. Sorry, they were in there listening to the radio, and they said, "I'm treading on starlight." That was a line that you and I had talked about. Oh, I want to use this line. But that's a good example of where I didn't know how to build a comic around it until I realized, showing some restraint when you're on a road trip and you're not trying to drink a lot of soda is a great example of that. So that seemed like a perfect time to use it. There are a lot of questions that people send in. Are the beings going to try drugs, stuff like that? And I'll always I'll laugh about it. It is funny because of how many different people ask me if the beings are going to do this or that. And I always try to say listen. There's only so many different ideas that I want to actually show. I think the beings as they already show that they do ingest mild poison, and that's enough, I think, for them. And I actually got a message from someone who said that had made her think a lot about the intake of alcohol because of my use of the phrase mild poison. So it made me think this is part of what we're doing here is just we're having fun, but we're also at times saying something that's uncomfortably true. That is what we do. We ingest mild poison together. So next question from the crowd. Here's a question.
So kind of following up on what you just said,
Sure.
How did you come up with the particular language and phrasing that the beings use?
That's a good question. I think one of the most important aspects of naming is that I want it to be about the meaning of the object as much as it is about the function. There's a lot of meaning in some of what we say. So life giver is a good example. A life giver, both parents are called life giver. It's just a genderless term. And the idea really is that I want to show that there's something important here. And I think it does get lost sometimes, at least on me, when I say mom or dad. Mom, dad. Those are phrases that they just don't, they don't have a meaning to me. That something like life giver, it really makes me stop and think, as much as I get frustrated sometimes, these people did give me life, so that's an interesting context here for this conversation. And the same thing with sustenance preserver. When your offspring creates a low detail rendering and you put it on the sustenance preserver, those are meaningful words here, because sustenance preserver itself almost is kind of redundant. This is what preserves the thing that sustains you. That's why the refrigerator is so important. It's crucial because without it you would die, essentially. And I think about life before refrigerators. This was a time. There was a time before refrigerators, which I remember because I watched this movie where he tries to bury. I was like Into the Wild. It was like a true story. But he tries to bury the food, tries to bury the meat, and then the flies get to it. This was life for humans up until recently. And then we got sustenance preservers, and now we live for a long time. It's really interesting, right? So yeah, I think the meaning and the import is a big part of it. But generally also the syllables. I try not to use 3 or 4 syllable words. It just keeps it from being too verbose. That's also why I break up a lot of the dialogue with saying okay, because that makes it funny, Trying to make it funny. Yeah. Good question, though. Next question from the digital audience.
Okay. Why did you pick this color scheme for Strange Planet?
Oh, good question. I actually had just one comic that I made at BuzzFeed. I worked at BuzzFeed for 4 years, and I made one comic that used pink and blue, and I loved it, and I loved that palette, and I just went into it Strange Planet in February. I thought, I'm going to use pink and blue again. So that's what happened. It wasn't super, super meaningful beyond that. I just thought the 2 colors were really pretty. So they're pretty. Next question from the crowd. Here's a question.
Thank you. So while we were waiting for you guys to come up here, I at least heard some people come up with their own voices for beings.
Oh, right. Yes.
Do you have a particular voice for beings?
That's a good question. Do I have a voice for the beings? As I mentioned, they're genderless. So one of the most important ideas to me is that should a TV show happen, should that animation happen, that really is just openness in terms of who would try out for the part and who gets what part. The spectrum that I think of instead of gender, the spectrum I think of for these beings is kind of how interested in perishing are they? So you'll see that in a lot of comics because in a roller coaster comic, one is way more excited than the other. One wants to do it and the other says I don't want to perish today. And that's kind of the idea, that I think there are more interesting spectrums. And this isn't groundbreaking. It really isn't. Think about Winnie the Pooh, right? Are those characters, do they have genders? Maybe, but can you even tell? Honestly, I don't know. Same with obviously a lot of the Muppets and Big Bird and everything. It's so the idea is really you're thinking of different spectrums about how interested are they in being adventurous, adrenaline junkies, or how interested are they in being extroverted versus introverted. So there are other spectrums that I can use. But I think just generally I always hear the aliens from Toy Story in my head because that's when I'm drawing it. They're very excited. They have reverence for the claw. There's tremendous amount of reverence there. I love the aliens from Toy Story for that reason. Yeah, and also I think emotion is important. As I'm saying, there's tremendous emotion in what we're trying to make. So many different alien scenarios have been kind of the monotone robotic voice, and I want to go to the opposite end of the spectrum on this. So that's what I think. It's a good question. Next question from digital.
Do you set a specific time aside every day to create,
Mm-hmm.
or do you wait for something to inspire you?
Taylor could help me answer that question. She knows because we have a very small apartment. She knows exactly when I get up in the middle of the night to draw. So she's so patient. But the idea really is that a daily comic is useful for many reasons. As I mentioned, building. As I mentioned, consistency. But one of the reasons that daily comic is most useful for a creator is that it forces you to create. You just have to do it. You have to do it. So you make a comic, you put it out there. There are comics that you would rate, a C or a B, but you still post it, and that's okay. Daily comic creates that rhythm. So yes, I do actually. I have to in the morning. I have to finish my comic, and in the afternoon, at some point, I'm going to post at least one comic on Facebook. That's just a really simple way that I use the different platforms. So I have 1 million followers on Facebook, and they're the first to see a comic because I post a black and white version there. If the comic doesn't really hit and people don't understand it, then I'll rewrite it, and that's what I do before I put it onto the Instagram, which is what I consider the canon of Strange Planet. The canon is on Instagram. Next question from the crowd.
How far in advance do you actually plan the posts?
Usually, if I'm posting at 9 a.m., usually 8:55. So I appreciate that question. How far in advance do I plan? There's a GIF of Wallace and Gromit is putting a train track out in front of his locomotive. That's exactly what doing a daily comic feels like. But I will say that the comic book itself that you're holding has many new comics in it. So obviously I had to create a lot of new material for the book, which is great. That's a part of, I think, again, part of the quality that we as a team, HarperCollins, they're really great at HarperCollins, and this is my third book with them. One of the nice things is that we're working together on something that we want is to be quality, and you can have it and you can give it as a gift. It's a good size for that, so don't forget to buy two. But yeah, we have a bunch of Strange Planets that we just signed in the back. So yeah, it's like you're really trying hard just to, as much as possible, have a really, really funny one in the future, so that you can look forward to that. I think that's the best way to put it. Yeah. Next question from the Instagram.
Have any of the terms you've used in your comics become everyday vocabulary you use in real life?
Taylor, I know why you chose that one. Taylor actually has told me several times to stop talking like the beings. So this exact scenario has happened. But I think it's usually it's in single words. It's something. I'll say something like, "Oh, that was unwise." And she'll say "Have you ever said unwise before you started drawing this comic?" And I think I might have it once maybe, but she definitely knows when I'm using a word that is something I would only write.
Yeah.
Really.
Well, it'll be saying unwise, and then this is sitting on the couch with us.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
I know who inspired
There's
this.
a lot going on
This
right now.
being inspired it. We're in the comic now.
Yeah.
We can't go back. Yeah, it's true. Next question from the crowd.
Who made the puppet?
Oh, who made the puppet? Yeah, good question. The company is called Culturefly. So essentially what happened was when Strange Planet was starting to get popular, there were multiple different merchandising people who were jumping up and down to help us do some merchandise, which is fun. Threadless does a large majority of it, which I see some Threadless material out there. I see it right here. And that's great. Threadless does a lot of T-shirts and stickers and prints and whatnot. The puppet is made by a company here in New York called Culturefly, and they're tremendous. They do tons of different licenses, Game of Thrones and everything. So it's really nice because they have a real professional team, and we're working on getting these in 2020. First quarter, they said, we think, hopefully.
They're going to be for sale.
Yeah. What's that?
They're going to be for sale.
Yeah. So we're going to have some plushies and vinyls for sale. And we're really excited because I think people are you know what I love most is seeing people interact with it, seeing them post it, and even just with their kids or with their cats or whatever is really exciting. So yeah, we love that. Next question from Instagram.
Okay. Someone wants to know what my favorite comic is.
Oh, interesting. Taylor, what is your favorite comic?
So I think it's the Imagine Pleasant Nonsense.
Imagine Pleasant Nonsense. Ah, good question.
Yeah. Which I like to answer a lot, but we also like to talk about
your least favorite?
what my least favorite comic
Yeah,
is.
Taylor has a least favorite, which she told me right away.
Yeah. Do you want to do?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'll tell you. Essentially, when I showed this one to Taylor, she's the first person to see these things. She was like, "I don't like that," and it was a scene where this being is trying to give a gift to another being and wants the being to destroy the concealment. Because Taylor thinks it's really nice when you wrap a present, and it's really a sweet thing, and she thought I was kind of making light of it. So,
and I was like, "This is not good, and no one's gonna like it." And everyone loved it.
And a lot of people loved it, right? But I think part of it is like destroying concealment is like, it's beautiful. Like it is beautiful. It's strange to like tear something apart that someone worked so hard on, but it is a beautiful thing that you get to destroy it. We're not here for long, you know. That's part of the messages of Strange Planet. Like you get to wrap a present really beautifully. You get to tear it up. We're all gonna perish, you know. Just do it. Just do the thing. Yeah, that's what I think. Next question from the crowd.
What led you to writing the single word underneath all of the comics with the spaces in between?
You know, every day, I just decided at the very beginning, every day I'm going to post one word. And a lot of people made a really intense game out of it, so which is really funny to me because someone wrote a detailed data treatise on it. They actually crunched the numbers, and they were trying to figure out if there was a pattern to what I do. And honest to goodness, there's no pattern. there's no reason so every day I just choose one word from the comic, and this person who crunched the numbers actually said, I think 35 words average on my comics. Ever since I read that, I've been trying to like get it under 35, but 35 word average on my comics, and then I choose one and I put it under the comic. And it's fun. It's like it's a fun way to interact with people, and I give extra points sometimes to people who are working really hard. But yeah, I just decided that was a fun way to kind of like space out the word. That was something that Taylor did once. She texted me a word that she had spaced all the letters out in, and I thought, oh, this is fun. I'm going to use it in the comic. So again, Taylor was the instigator there. Yeah. Next question from the Instagram.
How is it to have to promote your work and consistently post on many platforms?
Yes. You know what's interesting about platforms is if you don't post on them, other people will post on them for you. So there's a certain amount of urgency to trying to own the platform and own your section on it. That part can be exhausting, and what I want to always encourage artists to do is to like, you know, have a lot of like concern about how much you're trying to put on yourself. Strange Planet succeeded for lots of different reasons, and so it's hard to recreate. So I never want people to try to like do that by working themselves to death, because that's not right. But I will say that like the biggest thing for me when it comes to posting on multiple platforms is just to have a hierarchy and to use them for different things. So proprietary Twitter, I'm going to be retweeting a lot more comics from other artists. It's an important part of my Twitter. And then on Facebook, I'm going to try out new ideas. And on Instagram, I'm going to put what I feel like is the finished product. So that's the idea. Like, use different platforms differently. That's the best way I can encourage you to use multiple platforms. I think we have time for a couple more questions. I want to leave as much time for the Q&A, or sorry, the signing as possible. Yeah. Question from the crowd.
So there are a few comics about raising children, which are spot on.
Thanks.
So I'm guessing, I don't know if you guys have children or not, but
this is our only child so far, right here. The question is, you know, how do we come up with the children comics? I will say I was a day camp counselor at the YMCA, and so I remember I had 5 to 7 year olds, which I feel like 5 to 7 year olds is like the absolute prime for saying incredibly like space cadet stuff. Really funny. And I remember one kid, we were out in the not a big forest, but we got a little turnaround, and we had to walk longer. And if you're walking like a mile for a 7-year-old, it's like 10 miles. But I remember he was like pointing at me saying, "We're gonna die, and it's gonna be your fault." And I remember thinking like, this is where good material comes from. And I'm not the first person to say that. I think Tina Fey talks about that. With Tracy Jordan, like that, a lot of the lines are from Tracy Jordan is actually saying lines from Tina Fey's daughter. That's it. When you have a really funny character, they're just speaking like a child a lot of times. So I think interacting with children is important. We also have friends who have kids, and ultimately in our home, between the two of us, I know that Taylor will occasionally say things to me that I'll end up writing in the comic where I am the child. So that definitely happens. I think the time when I used the knife to stab some food and you were like, "Nathan, really?" I think, yeah, and then I put that in as a child doing it. So
or eating when you're gonna ruin your appetite, whatever that one
Oh
was.
yeah. I was eating before dinner.
I was making dinner, and I was like, I'm really gonna eat that bag of chips right now. I'm about to make dinner.
Yeah, and I put that in the
comic.
comic.
Was made the next day out of it. So
I was the child.
That's what happens.
Yeah. I was like, that was my comeback, because in the comic I was like, really, what difference does it make, honestly, if I keep eating? So, yeah.
Apparently not.
Yeah. I remember that. That's true. Good question. But yes, no children yet beyond this one. Question from the Instagram.
Do you keep a dictionary that compiles all of the words you've used / replaced?
Yeah, you can see in the back of your book here, there's a glossary that I've started. What's nice about the glossary is, again, like, this is the kind of stuff I just love creating. I could just create a whole book of just this because it's fun. And so when I got opportunities to make new comics in the book, there's a 2-wheel foot pusher, and like a 2-wheel foot pusher to me is such a good example of how I'm always trying to name the objects in ways that have good rhythm. So it's like Imagine Pleasant Nonsense or 2-wheel foot pusher, something you could sing. And I've shown that in a few times, rewriting the Itsy Bitsy Spider song and doing some of the other songs in there. Are really important to me that I use the right syllable count, because I really am obsessed with like syllable count. So definitely keeping those glossaries is a continuing passion of mine. Yeah. Next question from the crowd.
You said that the first post was in February. When did you start working on the book?
Good question. The first post was in February. I believe HarperCollins, y'all reached out March or April, right? Yeah. Pretty much like right away. So yeah, when we were working on the book idea, right away, my agent and HarperCollins and everyone, we got together, and then my agent said, Nathan, make sure you're banking comics, as in like, storing up comics. And I absolutely did not do that. So like, I was like, no, I'm going to post my best comic every day. And then at the end, you remember how late I stayed up trying to like finalize the end ones. But the idea really is, ultimately, it's really hard, especially when you have the attention of the internet. It's really hard not to post your best work. So that's one of the trickiest balances you do when you're creating one of these books. That's a good question. We'll do another question from the audience, because I see there are a few more, and I don't want to deny. Oh, sure. Yeah. You can do all those three. That's fine.
I was wondering how you and Taylor met.
Oh, sure. Taylor and I met at a event here in the city. That was a church event. So we happened to be going to the same church, but we go to another church event that we didn't know that we were both there. But it was how to be friends to our immigrant neighbors. It was a really interesting panel discussion about like how we can help our immigrant neighbors in New York, and all the different like really neat like nonprofits that are out there that help people to immigrate and help people to adjust and acclimate. It was a really interesting event. So I happened to be there. I saw Taylor and I said, hey, do you want to come out with us? So we're getting a drink afterwards. And she said no. So that was it. Our first time. But next time it worked out okay. And then we had Chinese food, our first date. And then I found out she doesn't like Chinese food. So just there's a lot of like trial and error, like always. But that was how we met, through a church event. Yeah. Good question. Another question from the audience over there?
So I know you mentioned before that sometimes things that happen in your real life end up making it into the comics.
Yes.
So I wonder, have you ever gotten in trouble?
Oh, yes. With someone? Have I? Yeah, I don't think I've gotten in trouble, have I?
I think, no. I was a little annoyed at the food one.
Yeah, because I literally was like, you were the parent and I was the child.
Yeah, that was annoying.
No, that was me kind of like pushing the edge a little bit. But generally, like, there really is a lot of real life here, because Star Damage is a good example. Taylor likes to be out in the sun. I absolutely, my body just doesn't agree with it. And like the sun really does damage me in ways, as it has my ancestors as well. So it just doesn't work out very well. No. But that's a good example of where like there's always these spectrums that are absolutely from real life. Yeah. Taylor likes the sun more. Next question from the audience. Oh, okay. Oh, I thought there was more over there. Oh, okay, Emma, you have a question? Oh, final question from my editor. Everyone give Emma a hand. Woo! Yeah, this is my editor. It's no.
Okay, so my question is, you have your rating system.
Sure.
When you post on Facebook, do you already kind of know when you're posting a B or a C, or is that determined by the feedback you get?
Good question. It's a great question. It's really hard to know. When you're creating for the internet, it's impossible to know if they're going to like something. I say that as someone who's created for a long time and done many thousands of things on the internet. You still just don't know. You don't know. You don't know if they're going to like it or not. Part of it is you're always trying to surprise the reader. Surprising the reader is tough, and that's something Cassie taught me. Cassie, my first editor, she said, always try to surprise the reader, and really reward the rereaders, right? So when you're trying to surprise the reader, that means you're going to end up trying new things. So today's comic had a whole block of text on the first and the second panel on Facebook, and it got a good reaction and did well, but not like as well as some. Part of the idea you're trying to determine in these cases is like, all right, I want to lead the audience in a certain way. So if this one doesn't share as well, that's okay, because I want to lead them down this road where they're going to get used to reading blocks of text sometimes. I don't know if that's the case in this Strange Planet, but it's always an experiment in leadership. And leadership is partly about that. You're trying to make sure what you're doing is not just a reaction to how many people clap. So, yeah. With that said, you can clap. Yeah. Yay. Oh, thanks. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Give it up for Nathan and Taylor.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.